Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel, and today we have a challenge run in a different game than XCOM 2. I'm still working on the other one, but I kind of came up with this run on the fly, so I decided I was going to do it because it wouldn't take very long. This run is attempting to beat the strategy game BattleTech with only ever dropping in a single mech. You see, with BattleTech, you have the option to deploy 4 units, similar to XCOM, how you have squads. However, the idea is that those 4 units will complement each other's abilities in order for you to take down a much larger and stronger force. We are going to completely eliminate that strategic advantage and only ever drop a single mech. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of the video, if you like the video, consider subscribing. It helped the channel out a ton, trying to see how far I can get with this thing. Now for the rules. The main rule is very obvious. We're only ever allowed to drop a single mech into combat. The exception to this rule is if the game forces us to deploy a mech that is not our own. This is because we don't have any choice in the matter and can't strategize around having only that mech, and usually the mission is balanced around you having that mech. Now, I will try and complete those missions with only that mech. However, if I can't, it will not be considered a violation of the run in dropping one of my mechs in addition to that mech. Now, this is a theory run. It is not a standard run. I have edited the save file to give me every battle mech chassis and weapon available, as well as editing it so I had maxed out pilots. This is because I'm just testing to see if the mission is possible, and not actually grinding to get up to that mission. If I do an actual run, of course this will not be the case. However, for this run in particular, I'm given everything I need. Finally, because this is a theory run, I'm not enforcing a once I lose a mission that I have to restart the run. I am allowed to try each mission as many times as I want, figuring out a strategy because of it. And Battletech's a really interesting thing as well. Because of all the campaign missions, you cannot fail a campaign mission. Unlike in XCOM, where certain missions you can fail and just have to try it again with a new squad because your old one was wiped out. This one, if you fail a campaign mission, you either have to reload before that mission or restart it right then and there. Now, I won't be showcasing very many of the buffer missions in this video because in order to get to the campaign missions, you have to do some regular missions in between. I'll be only focusing on the campaign missions unless something really interesting happens in one of the regular missions. So without further ado, let's get into it. This first mission is going to be extremely easy because you are pretty much meant to send in the lance you start with. You're not really meant to get any upgrades, maybe a few customizations. So at the beginning, they're only going to send some tanks and turrets at you, which really aren't a threat to our big bad assault mech. Normally, you wouldn't have an assault mech this early in the game, but you can if you spend enough time grinding and get access to the black market, which I will touch on later, why the black market's so powerful. So we basically stomp through this whole section. It's not until the second half that things are getting a little more dangerous. And the second half is getting a little more dangerous is because this was when the game throws some mechs your way. Now, they're mostly light mechs, and there's even still a few tanks mixed in. However, we have to confirm kills quickly before we get swarmed, because there's no cover on this map, which means we can't reduce the damage our mech takes. Thankfully, these mechs are in really poor condition, and they only have a quarter of their normal armor, so our Annihilator can just absolutely blast through them, no problem. Even the heavy mech they throw at us doesn't stand much of a chance against the Annihilator. We take it out in a few well-placed salvos. After that, we clean up a few tanks, finish the mission, and come out completely fine. Now for the second campaign mission. This one's actually a little bit more interesting than the first one. This one has about 6 sets of turrets. The problem is, there's no easy way to take all these turrets out. There's also a fair number of tanks. So I specifically brought a pilot who could target multiple enemies at once. That way they can take down multiple of these weak targets. Generally, we don't have to be too careful on these early missions because the odds of them breaking through our armor armor and getting to our internals is really low, so we can kind of just charge right at them and blow stuff up without much worry. And that's my general strategy for about the first half of the game. After a long and annoying game of cat and mouse with some tanks, I finally get my Annihilator into the facility, and this is when we're going to see our first and only mechs of this mission. And we easily tear through these guys too. We use a multi-target and opportune moment to take out some multiple enemies, and we even get an allied mech to come help us, though it's relatively unnecessary. So another easy mission, but they're gonna start getting harder real quick. And this is one of those instances that I want to showcase a non-campaign mission, because this is going to show what it really means to be outnumbered in this game. This is because you're normally outnumbered when playing the game normally. It's your 4 mechs versus normally 8 mechs. And your job is to isolate targets and synergize your mechs to take them down. But because we don't have this, we end up getting into a situation where we have guys on both sides of us, and things start taking a turn for the worse. And right here's the tail end of the mission, too, and we've pretty much cleaned up at this point. There's a few stragglers still around, but they're mostly crippled, or I can one-shot them. But the problem is with all of these mechs, our Annihilator has already lost half its armor, and its internal on one side torso. That side torso goes, that means that's half the firepower. Thankfully for the mission, if we had lost it, it wouldn't have been that big a deal because we would have had enough firepower to still get through it. But in a campaign mission, that's when it's bad because we need every ounce of firepower. Now, thankfully, we take down the mission without losing anything, but it was good to showcase here how hard this challenge can actually be if we're already exposed in an early game mission. And now for campaign mission number 3, because this one was worrisome. We're on a time limit this time, so we have to get through everything alright. Our first objective is to eliminate the vehicles right in front of us. If we do it within 6 turns, we activate some friendly turrets, which are invaluable to completing this mission on time. Thankfully, I brought a pilot with multi-targets so we can take these enemies out really quickly without them being able to do really any damage to us, but it ends up not being too helpful. Because what ends up happening is I activate the turrets, but all the enemies get to shoot beforehand. So what ends up happening is all the turrets get demolished before I really have any chance to take advantage of the turrets. So by the time my mech gets into the frame, most of the turrets are already destroyed and they don't end up doing much of anything. Because if any of you have played BattleTech before, you know turrets really like to sensor lock their opponents, which, while it is helpful because it reduces their evasion, for a high accuracy mech like myself, I don't need that evasion reduced, and I'd much rather have them shoot. So that means I have more enemies to deal with and less time to get to the objective. I was really worried about the time crunch here and wasn't sure if I could make it. My plan was basically to keep marching forward and using vigilance every round, so that way my mech would have damage reduction, and then I just shoot at whatever I thought I could kill while moving forward every round, because I felt like that I had just enough speed that if I took my time, then I'd be okay. What ended up happening was I was moving a little slower than I would have liked, and there weren't that many enemies left on the board, but I only had a few turns left to complete the objective. So I decided that with all the damage was taking, I actually had more armor on the back of my mech. So I would just take off at a dead sprint and count the amount of turns. I determined that it would take me 3 turns to get line of sight on the thing, and then a 4th turn to shoot, which means I had one more turn to just to move forward and just shoot at them, hopefully taking one more unit out so I don't get unlucky and die. And now for the next mission of the campaign. This one is particularly difficult in vanilla, simply because it is based around completing as many secondary objectives as possible. However, because we don't need to complete the secondary objectives, and we don't need the extra money that is awarded to us, we can simply go for the primaries and move around to complete only the primary. That makes this mission particularly easy. We have to take down 10 mechs. Most of them are light mechs. There's a few mediums and heavies. And we even have ammo crates to blow up to take out large amounts of enemies at once. So this mission goes pretty well with almost no hiccups. However, the next mission isn't nearly as friendly. While there aren't as many enemies this time, in fact, the first lance only has 25% of their normal armor, there's a fair amount of turrets, and we have a time limit to complete an objective. The first half of the mission isn't too hard, but we don't have very much cover, so we take more damage than I would like. It was mostly just bad play on my part, but we generally just didn't have enough cover to reduce damage. But then the second part of the mission hits, and it's a little more difficult.
Heavy damage. Ah, damn it. I'm losing weapons. Give them everything you've got.
Oh, this isn't good. Wait a minute. For the first time, I'm actually in danger.
Receiving you.
Oh no. Even with that hiccup, we do manage to get through the rest of the mission pretty easily. It's a little tight, especially because we're running out of ammo on our big weapons, and the heat sinking just completely went out the window as soon as half our mech blew up. But we do manage to get through it just barely, and this was so far the closest we've gotten to total mech destruction. Though what ended up happening was I didn't even need to worry, because unlike XCOM 2, BattleTech line of sight is really generous. And I was able to get a shot without having to get all the way up there, which meant I had a few more turns than I thought, and I really didn't have to stress over it too hard. There are only a few enemies left, so after this, I just mopped up, and that's the end of the third mission. And now on to a mission where I had to adopt a very different strategy. Now, for this one, we are forced to drop a single mech, a 55-ton Kintaro. However, I didn't even need to play the mission with just that mech to know it wasn't possible with only that mech. The mech that we are given just doesn't have enough firepower or armor to make it through it alone. Regardless, I adopted a different strategy for this mission. I ended up bringing a medium mech, not my big bad assault mech. For this mission, I felt it was important to have mobility and firepower, not armor and firepower, because we end up getting swarmed by a lot of units that get to move before our assault mechs. So by bringing a quick medium mech, I am allowed to move before they get a chance to attack, and therefore take them out before they can hit me. The beginning of the mission really isn't anything to worry about, it's just a few tanks. However, it's the second half of the mission where things get dangerous. And this is because 4 turrets spawn right on top of us, as well as waves of incoming tanks for the rest of the mission. Now, we got pretty atrocious luck by this point, and the Kintaro was already internal. Now, the Kintaro has to survive for us to complete the mission. It's a primary objective. So if it goes down, then we have to start over. Now, we can take out the 2 most dangerous turrets very easily, but that still leaves 2 turrets with a lot of firepower left to fire at us, as well as the tanks incoming. And anyone who's played BattleTech before knows that turrets should not be left alive. They just do too much damage. And as you can see here, our Kintaro gets its leg knocked off, which means it's knocked to the ground and is really... Regardless, our high mobility strategy is working. This medium mech is kitted specifically to do large amounts of damage with 2 shots, to knock out these tanks easily, and also knock out the turrets. This allows us to keep our mech with high evasion while dishing out decent damage and securing kills, while the Kintaro can take care of the turrets because it also has very decent firepower, it's just not very pinpoint. We do end up getting through this mission no problem. First try, and I think that's because I went for the mobility strategy. Being able to jump around with our medium mech allowed us to take pot shots and generally control the engagement, and we didn't have to risk armor blow-throughs because we weren't getting hit very often, but it was really close if our Kintaro was going down. Now, the next campaign mission we're thrown into immediately after the past one, but thankfully this is a mission where we are forced to drop a full lance of mechs that isn't our own, which means it plays out the exact same way it does in a normal playthrough, and we get through it just as easily. Now, this campaign mission, however, is a doozy of a mission. This mission is usually not that difficult in normal play because you have to defend 3 flanks at the same time. One main flank with a bunch of mechs and 2 flanks that have a few other mechs. Normally with 4 mechs you can move them around and make it so you can blunt all sides of attack while protecting your secondary objective. However, we don't have that luxury here. We only have 1 mech. So what I ended up doing is I took our assault mech and gave it a few jump jets. That way it could jump up on a wall and get a nice field of fire and hopefully protect the 2 dropships we need to protect. By needing to protect 2 dropships, that means we have to defend at least 2 of the 3 flanks with only one of our mechs. Getting a little further into the mission, the dropships on the right and left flank are here. I've decided to position myself to try and protect the left flank, as that's just the one I chose. I felt it would probably be easier to get good lines of fire and maybe even be able to protect all 3. I end up using multi-target here to target multiple units in the hope of maybe killing a few, but at the very least getting their attention so they can't shoot at the ships and make it so I can complete my objective. And it doesn't do a whole ton of damage. In fact, it flat out misses one of them, so that's not great. Thankfully, though, we managed to keep things just barely together, so 2 dropships managed to get away. There is a third one, but that's just a secondary to protect at this point, which means it's just going to be a flat-out kill mission. All we have to do is knock out all the enemy forces, and we win. It's a little tight, but we don't actually take much damage, and we end up coming through. However, it is worth noting that I actually failed my first attempt at this mission. I cut it out to save time in the video. It pretty much went down as we got a little overwhelmed. I didn't have good lines of fire, and they just got to shoot at the tanks too much, and they ended up destroying 2 dropships. And now on to my, in opinion, the easiest mission in the campaign. It's easier than the intro missions, even including the fact that you have stronger mechs. If you have the same mechs as you had at the beginning, you could win this mission. The idea here is you have 3 different refineries to get to, and you have to take them all out. However, the gimmick here is that you will only ever activate 1 refinery at the time, and the mechs will not see you coming, meaning you get to sneak up on them. This just makes the mission extremely easy. We get to sneak up on this first group and knock them out. It's just a lance of medium mechs. And we actually don't even have to do the other 2. They're just secondaries. So I just evac because we don't need the money for our theory run and call it a day. And now time for one of the hardest missions of the campaign. This mission's idea is that you're supposed to stop 6 enemy APCs from reaching the base. If even one of them does, it's an automatic mission failure. The problem about this is they start really close, and they keep coming in as the mission progresses, and they're very quick too. So you have to knock them out really quickly, and we have to make use of multi-target. That's why I took the Jump Jet Annihilator again, and was just going to try and split fire and knock out as many enemies as possible. And this strategy actually ends up working, though albeit not very well, just barely. Because we end up being able to knock out every APC just barely before it gets through. As you can see here, this one is 1 turn away. We don't knock it out now, we lose the mission. I end up going for just the smaller Ultra AC for the kill because I need the ammo for the big ACs, and they don't have very good hit chances. So I just decided to take the chance here, and it ended up paying off, thankfully. The final APC of the mission does get dangerously close to the zone, but thankfully we can take it out. And by doing that, it makes turrets come online to help us deal with the rest of the guys. It's a tight squeeze to finish it off, but we do manage to come out of the mission on top. Once again, I did fail my first try, but that wasn't really a fair one. I lost in 2 turns because the enemy APC was closer than it should have been. But other than that, this mission went pretty well, and we ended up getting a winning run pretty quickly. And now for the mission that drove me half insane doing this challenge. The mission that made me think it wasn't actually possible. This mission is time-based, as once you get past the first few objectives, you are on a timer to complete the mission, which is you have to capture a zone. This means you need a quick mech to do it. However, there are so many enemies that you also need a mech with firepower. But there are no quick mechs with both firepower and speed that also have armor. So it comes down to you don't ever have what you need. And while your mech that is dropped with you, that is excluded from the rules of the challenge, is a 100-ton Atlas with massive firepower, its armor isn't actually the best for a 100-ton mech, which means it dies fairly quickly. So that means you need to kill your enemies faster or make it so they can't kill you as fast. The strategy I ended up coming up with was using ECM. Now, if you've never played BattleTech before, ECM gives your mechs a cloaking device, essentially, in which any friendly mech within the bubble cannot be shot as long as they have not shot and there's not an enemy mech within the bubble. We managed to get through the first 2 waves of enemies and start heading towards our timed objective. This is why I wanted the Cataphract ECM mech in particular, because this mech has decent speed and armor, as well firepower that's adequate enough to take down light mechs so our Atlas can focus on the bigger ones. So I'm sprinting towards the objective, and my Cataphract is actually going to end up peeling off from the Atlas and going to capture the objective while the Atlas is just going to try and stay in cover. This strategy ends up working fairly well. It's really close with the Atlas. The Atlas almost goes down, but thankfully the Cataphract can come in and finish the job before our Atlas goes down. This mission took me around 10 tries to figure out a build that worked, and this Cataphract may not actually be obtainable in the vanilla game, because normally these mechs you find in specific faction stores. I don't know if it comes up in the black market, so if I ever do an actual run of this challenge, that means I'm going to have to come up with a much different strategy. And now for the final 3 missions of the game. I can do these missions one after another, so I just went through and knocked all 3 of them out. No of these intermediary missions or anything like that. Now you see this time, I've actually brought back the Phoenix Hawk. I'm using a slightly different build this time, but it's still focused around that high mobility and high firepower aspect. For this mission, you have a time limit to knock out 3 generators, and it's very mountainous and hilly terrain, meaning jump jets excel here. Now, we can easily knock out a generator with only 3 of our pulse lasers, but I fire 4 just in case one misses somehow. And those also knock out the turrets nearby. The idea for this mission is we're going to jump around, knock out all the generators, and then continue to bounce around and fight the mechs. It's going to be a long one. And by long, I mean 22 minutes long. Most vanilla BattleTech missions take 10 to 15 minutes. Some of these took 5 minutes to do, somewhere in that ballpark. This was by far the longest mission of the campaign because of how we had to play it. Despite how slow it was, the mission ended up going alright. We did it first try. It really wasn't that hard, it was just strategic. However, we didn't end up ending the mission with only 1 structure on the leg, so that could have gone a lot worse. However, we got through it, and we're able to move on to the second of the last 3 missions. For this mission, I ended up taking a slightly more snipey build for the mech. The idea was we had to move to an objective within a time limit, as well as escorting some APCs to get friendly turrets online. Without these friendly turrets, this mission's going to be very difficult. So I decided range was going to be very important, plus our firepower, because its ballistics, is still very strong. Now, this mission's pretty straightforward, and even in vanilla play it is, and it's a relatively easy mission. We don't really face much threats because we got our turrets online, so most of the enemies just crumble. The main reason this mission may be hard in vanilla play is because the final mission takes place right after this, so if your pilots get injured or any of your mechs get destroyed, you can't bring them in. So that's really the major issue here, but because we're not worried about that in this instance, and we actually don't even have any of those things occur, we can just move right on to the final mission. And now for the last mission of the game. We're forced to bring Kamea again, but it's only a lance of 4 mechs, and it's against Kamea and our 1 mech. Now, I'm not going to be using our 1 mech until I can determine that it's possible with Kamea, but there's only 4 of them. Surely it's possible with just Kamea. Okay, King Crab showing itself early, that's not good. And we got hit by an AC-20, but, alright, it's fine. We can shrug off the damage and go on for an Alpha Strike. Oh, wait, that's a problem. So, as it turns out, when BattleTech released its third DLC, they released the ability for pilots to have special abilities. This was used in rare scripted cases, such as the final mission of the third DLC's mini-campaign. However, when they released this DLC, they actually updated the final mission of the main campaign, in which they gave Victoria, the King Crab pilot, special abilities. These abilities include their AC-20 shots inflicting massive aim debuffs on whatever is hit, the flamers on her mech increasing heat massively, and the medium pulse lasers crippling movement. So what does this mean for our case? That means this mission is substantially harder. Kamea, the Atlas pilot, is going to have to engage every other mech while somehow evading the King Crab and not getting hit by it. Now, I tell you, I tried everything. I fought in the woods on the left, I fought in the woods on the right. I tried to fight in the center lake so I could keep on shooting. Nothing worked. It always ended up with, when I engaged the King Crab, I couldn't hit my shots, and the Atlas was done for. Now, so I have to end up bringing the Annihilator in the fight. I know this isn't a violation of the rules we set, but it was pretty anticlimactic if I'm being honest, and I really thought I could do this final mission with truly a single mech. With the Annihilator in tow, we actually managed to, well, annihilate everything. The smaller mechs go down, and because Victoria can only shoot one of our mechs, whatever mech doesn't get hit will be able to hit her hard back. And that's really all it comes down to. And with one last salvo from our Annihilator, Victoria's King Crab falls. And that's the end of the campaign. So is it, given our rule set, theoretically possible to beat BattleTech with only a single mech? Yes. Yes, it is. But is it actually possible? Well, that's a question I haven't yet decided if I'm gonna answer, but I welcome anyone watching this video to try for themselves. I may end up doing an actual run, which I don't have anything at the start, and I have to grind through each of these missions. The reason I wanted to do a theory run was in case I didn't end up feeling like doing that run, because it really is just a big grindy mess. And that's not what I wanted to do. But that's it. And that means I've got to finally edit together my next XCOM 2 video, which is going to be XCOM 2, but it's an Advent Civil War. I am only using Advent and aliens for the entire campaign. Look forward to that in the coming some point. I will see you all the next time I upload, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day.